21st century is a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, or simply known as the VUCA world. To be responsive and relevant, engaging to evidence-based practice is one of the adaptive ways that education leaders and teachers can do. So what is evidence-based practice? It is about making decisions through consensus, explicit, and judicious use of the best available evidence from the multiple sources to increase the likelihood of a favorable outcome. As you can see, there are three main ideas that are important to consider in this definition. First is decision making, second is best available evidence, and last is to increase favorable outcome. But before we unpack these main ideas, let us try to be familiar first with the process of EBP, which is presented by 6 A's. There are 6 essential steps involved in EBP, and these are to ask, acquire, appraise, aggregate, apply, and assess. To ask is to simply translate a practical issue or problem into an answerable question. After asking what the need is, it's important to acquire systematically and search and retrieve important evidence. To appraise is to look at the trustworthiness and the relevance of your evidence. From there, you aggregate, you try to weigh and pull together the evidence, which ones are relevant and are useful in your practice. Then you will incorporate them, apply into evidence-based decision-making process through a specific intervention. And lastly, you would have to assess your actions, evaluate the outcome of the decisions taken. To complete our definition of evidence-based practice, we can say that EBP is about making decisions by asking, acquiring, appraising, aggregating, applying, and assessing so that you could increase the likelihood of a favorable outcome. Now, let us unpack the three main ideas involved in EBP. First, let's talk about decision making. You have to remember that as education leaders and teachers, sound decision making should come from assessing your needs because it is our moral obligation and it is a skill set that need to be enhanced. In order to make sound decisions, need assessment must be facilitated so that you can address the gap. Simply put, needs assessment is looking at a discrepancy or a gap for what is and what should be. This is a systematic set of procedures that you use to determine needs so that you can set your priorities. For instance, this is your current state and this is your desired state. So that you could fill the gap, the learning gap, it's very important to look at the details of the evidence presented. This is an example of a specific needs assessment where the need is about the children migrant in terms of proficiency level in reading. Now, after getting all the data you have acquired from the needs assessment, it's important to utilize them because this will be your basis for your solutions. And this will make you allocate your resources because you have to remember that resources are scarce and this will help you improve your programs and your services or the teaching learning process in the school. Remember, needs assessment are conducted to identify the right job. In the real world, there is never enough money or resources to meet all our needs. Therefore, educators, whether you are a school head or a teacher, should be skillful in making decisions. Again, decision-making skills should be harnessed because if you only have a hammer, you would think of all problems as snakes. Now, let's go to the second concept, which is about best available evidence. The question to answer is, what counts as evidence. Here, you can see that there is a fusion of evidence-based practice. First, you start with research, or commonly known as the research-informed practice. From there, you can combine it with the expert models. These are theories that you see in the literature, but more importantly, it's important to look at or to give value to your skills and experiences as a practitioner. Then after that, you can also engage into trial and error results, looking at the feedback from different stakeholders, and eventually look at the patterns you discover from all these observations, because this will yield to evidence-based practice. So what sources of evidence should be considered? As you take all these 6 steps in EBP, in summary, evidences should be considered as: number 1, the scientific research findings. It's important that you are theoretically grounded in your practice. Of course, you have to factor in your professional experience and judgment. Third, your organizational data, facts, and figures are very important to look keenly on the things happening in your context. And lastly, to look at the stakeholders' values and concerns. So finally, in looking for best available evidence, the question to ask is, why do we have to critically appraise them? Evidence is never perfect. It can be misleading. Therefore, when you critically appraise, it will give you an idea of how trustworthy it is and how relevant it is. Here are some guide questions for you to ask as you critically appraise the evidence that you have gathered. And finally, the third main idea in evidence-based practice is about increasing the favorable outcome. To increase your favorable outcome, EBP is expressed through clinical practice in education. This is a shift from the traditional to clinical approach. Let's start for the education leaders, which involve clinical supervision. Here, you can see that clinical supervision is a vehicle for developing professionals to be responsible, teachers who were capable of analyzing their own performance, who were open to change and assistance from others, and who were above all self-directing. Clinical supervision promotes collegial supervision. You can see here that vis-a-vis traditional supervision for education leaders, clinical supervision is focused on the classroom data based on the need, and it is cyclical. Here you can see the simple process of clinical supervision process. Now, for teachers, clinical teaching also have steps and questions that will guide you in your evidence-based practice. This is the clinical teaching cycle of Professor Griffin from Melbourne University. You start with asking yourself, what is the student ready to learn and what evidence supports this? From there, you will have to ask yourself, what are the possible evidence-based interventions? Then, you ask, what is the preferred intervention and how will it be resourced and implemented? Then you ask, what is the expected impact on learning and how will this be evaluated? Finally, you ask yourself, what happened and how can this be interpreted? Then you go back to the next step of the cycle. So, taking the fusion of clinical teaching cycle, you can see that this is a clear manifestation of evidence-based practice. We have just discussed the 3 main ideas in evidence-based practice: how to make decisions, about the best available evidence, and to increase a favorable outcome. To end this presentation, we ask ourselves, why do we need evidence-based practice? Let me emphasize in 4 important points. Number 1, it is very important to critically evaluate all the available data in education. Data should not be shelved. They are very important to inform our practice. Second, it is important to distinguish between popular ideas and those that work in your context. Sometimes we hear and we observe other ideas from other schools or other practice, but it is important to consider how they are relevant in your context. Thirdly, you have to remember that EVP improves quality of decisions that we make in the education sector. And finally, there is a need to recognize that evidence-based practice can inform transformative actions for our school systems.
Hello mga ka-edukampiyon! Paano mo mailalarawan ang iyong sarili sa pamamagitan ng isang #hugot? Lahat ay may sariling hugot na magbibigay ng konteksto ng isang tao. Sa larangan ng edukasyon, ang context ay tumutukoy sa pang-araw-araw na sitwasyon at karanasan ng isang tao. Ang teaching strategy na may kinalaman dito ay context-based approach. Contextualization of learning involves relating the lesson to a particular setting or situation to make the competencies relatable, realistic, and responsive to the learners. So, paano natin ito magagamit sa ating mga klase? Ating tandaan ang salitang SOAR, na isang mnemonics na maaaring maging gabay sa pagsasakatuparan ng contextualization sa ating pagtuturo. S stands for set the situation. Magbigay tayo ng sitwasyon kung saan pwede nating i-relate ang lesson. For example, sa isang chemistry class, maaari nating tanungin kung ano ang ginagawa nila para ma-preserve or hindi mabilis mapanis ang pagkain na pwede nating ma-relate sa factors affecting chemical reactions. Maraming sagot ang ating makukuha sapagkat bawat isa ay may unique context or practices sa kanilang mga tahanan. Then O means optimized experiential learning. Sa isang science classroom, hinihikayat na magkaroon ng hands-on activity upang maranasan ng mga estudyante ang science in action. Then A stands for activate constructivism. Hayaan natin ang mga estudyante na makabuo ng siyentipikong pakahulugan mula sa results ng activity. With this, students actively construct the meaning of science in real-life situations. Lastly, R means reinforce relevance. Maaari pa nating palawakin ang konkretong koneksyon ng leksyon sa buhay sa pamamagitan ng pagbibigay ng additional application or paggawa ng isang output. Sa pamamagitan ng estratehiyang ito, masasagot ng mga estudyante ang katanungan na, para saan ba itong inaaral ko? Kaya naman, naniniwala ako na with contextualization, our students can soar high sapagkat katuwang ang context-based approach sa paglikha ng pagkakatuto ng mga estudyante dahil pinauunlad nito ang kakayahan ng mga mag-aaral na ilapat ang pang-araw-araw na karanasan at mga bagay sa paligid sa mga konseptong pag-angham. Dagdag pa, patunay ito na ang agham ay may kaugnay at disiplinang may makabuluhang papel sa ating buhay. Ito ang galawang edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo?
Kumusta? Sa pagtuturo ng science ngayon, ang kailangan natin ay galawang edukampiyon. At yan ang isashare ko sa inyo. Evidence-based practice para sa science classes. Lumabas muna tayo ng classroom. Tara, sa community tayo. Pwedeng-pwede na ang gamitin nating konteksto sa science classes ay ang community issues. Ginagamit kasi ang science sa pagsosolve ng iba't ibang community problems. Pero paano nga ba malalaman ang totoong problema ng community? Ang kailangan ay yung best available evidence. Diyan papasok ang evidence-based practice. Magre-research tayo. Pero hindi yung simpleng Google search lang. Dapat may community needs assessment sa simula. Paano? Interview, survey, focus group, and roundtable discussions. Kapag ganito ang paraan, panalo ang evidence. Sa paano paraan naman kaya pwedeng i-connect ang science, community problems, at evidence-based practice? Design thinking. Design thinking, in a nutshell, is a problem-solving strategy na may puso. Maraming models ang design thinking. Gaya nitong ipapakita ko. Magsisimula tayo sa puso. Empathize. Ano bang kailangan, gusto, at experiences ng mga taong makikinabang sa design na binubuo natin? Ito ang basehan sa paggawa ng solution sa problema. Define. Gamit yung data na nakuha natin sa unang step, ano nga ba yung problem na dapat i-address? Generate ideas. Dito, mag-iisip na tayo ng innovative ways kung paano susolusyonan yung problem. Kaso, makaisip man tayo ng maraming magagandang creative solutions, hindi naman advisable na gawin lahat. Sa distill, pipili lang tayo ng pinaka-champion na idea. And then, sa prototype, gamit ang mga simpleng materials, gagawa tayo ng model ng design natin. Yung panghuling step ay communicate. Dito, i-highlight natin ang design ng prototype natin. Papato kaya sa mga end users? After ng isang round, kung may improve pa ang design, daanan ulit natin ang proseso. Bakit hindi? O di ba? Winner sa pagka-evidence-based ang design thinking. Ito ang galawang Edo Kampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo?
Magandang araw, ka-Edo Kampiyon. Anong mas nauna? Manok o itlog? May ilan na magsasabing manok, iba naman itlog. Ngunit, paano mo nasabi? Paano mo mapapatunayan? Sa loob ng isang science classroom, ang pagtatanong o pagbibigay problema ay mahalaga sa isang holistikong pagkatuto. Problem-based learning is a teaching strategy that provides students with real-life experiences, which in turn creates enthusiasm and provides students with a deeper level of understanding of the content, gamit ang kanilang sariling pangunawa, kakayahan, at ating gabay bilang mga guro, napapagtibay ang kanilang pag-iisip at pag-iimbestiga. Paano nga ba natin magagamit ang problem-based learning sa ating science lesson? Tandaan ang TSPR. Team, Scenario, Problem Question, at Student Role. Narito ang isang halimbawa upang mas maunawaan kung paano ibibigay at magagamit ang TSPR. Team, Earth Science, Effect of Typhoons on People and the Environment. Move on to the scenario. A devastating typhoon has recently struck your area. With another low-pressure area on the way, you have been asked to develop a plan for the mitigating effects on people and property of your school and surrounding community. Moving on to the problem question, how can we mitigate the impact of typhoons on the people and property in one high school? As for the student role, you are members of a local government unit and will present your disaster plans to the school board. Sa team ay makikita ang nais bigyang pansin na content area o societal focus. Ang scenario ay description at contextualisasyon na makakatulong sa mga estudyante upang maunawaan ang sitwasyon. Problem question ay isang scientific problem na maaaring may iba't iba na solusyon. Panghuli ay student role. Ito ang nagpapatibay ng perspective at gabay din sa kalidad ng solusyon na inaasahan mula sa klase. Ang masasabi natin, problem-based learning ay isang makapangyarihan na estratehiya sa pagkatuto. Gamit ito ay naipapamalas ng mga estudyante ang kanilang abilidad, inobasyon, at tungkulin sa komunidad. Ito ang galawang Edo Kampiyon ko. Anong sayo?
Magandang buhay mga ka-Edo Kampiyon. Minsan na naging laman ng social media platforms ang tanong na, sino nga ba ang dapat na magtanong sa classroom? Ang mga guro o ang mga mag-aaral? Iba-iba ang naging reaksyon ng netizens dito. Pero para sa inquiry-based learning, na isang uri ng evidence-based practice, ang sentro ng pagkatuto at pagtatanong ay ang mga mag-aaral. Ang inquiry-based learning ay isang pedagogical approach na tungkulin lamang ng mga guro ay maging tagapagpadaloy ng gawain, lumikha ng learning parameters, at tulungan ng mga mag-aaral na bigyang kahulugan ang kanilang mga karanasan gamit ang pagtatanong, pag-iimbestiga, at pag-eksperimento. Ang mataas na antas ng kaalaman ng guro sa aralin ay lubos na kailangan sa IBL upang mainam na mapadaloy ang talakayan at masagot ang mga katanungan ng mga mag-aaral at epektibong mabigyan ng kahulugan ang gawain ng mga mag-aaral. Isa sa mga gawain na maaaring gamitin sa mga klase sa agham na nakabase sa IBL ay ang pagsasagawa ng eksperimento. Dito, mas mainam na unahing gawin ng eksperimento. Imbitahan ng mga mag-aaral na ito ay imbestigahan upang makabuo ng mga ideya at tanong. Halimbawa, water cycle simulation gamit ang mainit na tubig, yelo at plastic container. Gawin ang eksperimento sa klase at paobserbahan ng mga ito sa mag-aaral. Matapos nito, bigyan ng pagkakataon ng mga mag-aaral na talakayin ang kanilang karanasan at mga katanungan. Gawin itong springboard ng diskusyon at content habang mas pinapalalim ito ng guro. Ang pangunahing idea ng IBL ay bigyan ng pagkakataon ng mga mag-aaral na i-explore ang kanilang natural curiosity gamit ang kanilang mga karanasan at mga kagamitan maging ang mga gawain na konektado sa talakayan. Likas sa kanila maging curious. Gamitin natin ito sa pagpapalalim ng kanilang kaalaman at kakayahan. Ito ang galawang edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo?
Magandang araw mga ka-edukampiyon. Bilang guro, ano ba ang ginagawa natin pagkatapos ang isang lesson? Di ba nagtatanong tayo sa mga estudyante, ano ba ang natutunan ninyo sa lesson na ito? Ano naman ang kalimitang sagot? May iba nagtataas ng kamay para sumagot, nagkukwento ng karanasan sa mga activities, at pinapaliwanag ang kanilang mga natutunan. Swerte na actually si teacher kapag may mga ganito mga estudyante. Karamihan, tahimik lang. Kailangan pang tawagin para magsalita. Marahil nahihiya dahil una, di sigurado kung may natutunan talaga. Pangalawa, kung may natutunan man, di alam kung paano ipapaliwanag ang kanilang mga natutunan. At pangatlo, peer pressure. Nahihiyang tawaging epal o know-it-all ng mga kaklase. Ano kaya ang pwede nating gawin para matulungan ang mga estudyante na makapag-reflect ng kanilang mga natutunan? Ang SNR technique na ang ibig sabihin ay solicit and revisit students' initial ideas ay pwedeng gamitin para matulungan ang mga estudyante na mailatag ng maayos ang kanilang mga natutunan nang hindi na ilalagay ang sarili sa spotlight para bawas peer pressure. Sa solicit stage, hinihikayat ang mga estudyante na ilabas ang kanilang stock knowledge o initial ideas and explanations tungkol sa lesson na pag-uusapan pa lang. Maaring mag-demo si teacher ng isang discrepant event gamit ang POE approach o Predict, Observe, Explain na sikat sa mga sciences. Pwede rin ang direktang pagtatanong. Magbibigay si teacher ng isang tanong na sasagutin naman ng mga estudyante. Ano man ang paraan na gagamitin, dapat hikayatin ang mga estudyante na ipaliwanag ang kanilang sagot. At importante sa solicit stage na naka-record ang mga initial ideas and explanations. Paano ba nare-record ang mga ito? Kung nasa face-to-face setup ang klase, pwedeng gumamit ng meta cards o post-its. Pwede gawin ito individually, by pair o by group para bawas peer pressure. Kung online setup naman, pwede gumamit ng Jamboard or Google Form. Ano man ang paraan ng pagre-record, dapat malayang nakapagsusulat ang mga estudyante ng kanilang mga initial ideas and explanations. Ang revisit stage naman ay ginagawa pagkatapos ng activities. Pwedeng gawin while doing the discussions or after the discussions. Sa revisit stage, binabalikan ang mga initial ideas and explanations. Dahil nakasulat ang mga ito,
Mas madaling maihahambing ng mga estudyante kung ano ang alam nila before and after the activities and the discussions. Sa ganitong paraan, kung may misconception sila, mas madali nila itong matukoy at maiwasto sa tulong ni teacher. Kung wala namang misconceptions, mas madali rin nilang makita kung paano nila mapabuti pa ang kanilang mga explanations. Pwede uli gawin ang revisit stage individually, by pair o by group to manage peer pressure. Kung tutuusin, familiar na tayo sa S&R technique. Binibigyang diin lang ng video na ito na dapat nakarecord ang mga initial ideas and explanations at kailangan balikan ang mga ito pagkatapos ng activities and discussions. Hindi sapat na makuha natin ang kanilang initial ideas and explanations without having to resolve them before the lesson ends. Ito ang dalawang edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo?
Magandang araw mga ka-edukampiyon. Ang dami na naman nating natutunan o marahil ang iba ay na-refresh sa atin ang mga ideya gaya ng context-based teaching and learning, design thinking pedagogy, problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning, at metacognitive approach. Sang-ayon ba kayo na ang mga ibinahagi ng ating mga teacher-lecturers ay evidence-based practices? Ano nga ba ulit ang evidence-based practice? If we can recall the video of Dean Jerome, evidence-based practice is about making decisions through the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of the best available evidence from multiple sources to increase the likelihood of a favorable outcome. Same as our student agency videos in science, we have carefully and thoughtfully selected the 5 topics as we believe that these reflect EBPs. Sinimula ni Teacher Hazel ang serye sa pagbabahagi ng context-based teaching and learning. Paano naging evidence-based practice ang context-based approach? Kung inyong matatandaan, ang context-based approach ay humuhugot mula sa karanasan ng mga estudyante upang malaman ang kanilang existing conceptions and learning needs. Specifically, the student's context is the evidence of their prior knowledge and experiences. Moreover, the capacity to contextualize serves as evidence of transfer of learning and index of lesson application. Isa pa, ang SOAR ni Teacher Hazel ay sumusunod sa 6 A's ng EBP. Ang galing, hindi ba? The second video by Teacher Tristan is on Design Thinking Pedagogy or DTP. How does DTP relate to EBP? If you can recall, DTP involves the conduct of Community Needs Assessment or CNA. The CNA is an effective method of gathering data which will be used to solve a particular problem. In EBP, the use of the best available evidence, in this case the CNA results, is highly encouraged. Also, the apply from the 6 A's of EBP is highlighted in DTP when the CAN results as the evidence are incorporated into the decision-making process. Our third video on problem-based learning was delivered by Teacher Clay. In her video, we learned that questions are essential part of classroom teaching and learning. Problem-based learning, or PBL, takes these questions or problems in a holistic approach. PBL is not only about the capability of the students to give solutions, but it also involves presenting real-life situations that they can relate with. These two make a student personally involved and critical in answering problems. Just like in context-based approach, the students' experiences and real-life situations are excellent pieces of evidence. Ang sumunod na video ay mula kay Teacher Denry. Tinalakay niya ang inquiry-based learning. Paano naging EBP ang inquiry-based learning? Ang konsepto at ideya ng inquiry-based learning ay pasok sa layunin ng evidence-based practice dahil hangad nitong ibigay sa mga mag-aaral ang pagkakataon na bigyang kahulugan ang kanilang mga karanasan na siyang paraan upang mas maging malapit o relatable sa kanilang aralin. Isa sa ebidensya ng pagkatuto. Sa ganitong paraan, mas magiging malalim ang kanilang kaalaman tungkol sa aralin sapagkat nakita nila ang aplikasyon o relasyon nito sa realidad o sa kabuuan sa kanilang buhay. IBL does not only help get answers to students' inquiry, but more importantly, IBL gives students the opportunity to show their knowledge and skills, which are again evidence of learning. The last video delivered by Teacher Ramon is about soliciting and revisiting students' initial ideas. What is the connection of this to EBP? The 6 A's of EBP are highlighted in SNR technique when the students are able to benchmark their initial understandings. Through careful processing led by the teacher, the students will be able to map out what they know or do not know about the topic. The solicit stage could even end with a question that captures the gap in the student's initial understandings, whereas the revisit stage particularly encourages the students to evaluate what they have learned. For the teacher, this will also be a venue to further analyze how far the students have gone in terms of their learning. So in both solicit and revisit stages, the teacher is constantly evaluating his or her students' learnings. The SNR technique also puts premium on evidence of learnings, particularly the records of the initial ideas. Through this concrete evidence, the students can better analyze how much they have learned. On behalf of teachers Hazel, Tristan, Clay, Denry, and Ramon, I hope you will try the evidence-based practices that we have shared. There's no better evidence of students' learning than for them to apply what they have learned to real-life context. Ito ang galawang edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo?